It was supposed to be the most beautiful day of her life. Julia stood at the edge of the aisle, heart pounding, hands trembling. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming promise that everything was finally aligning. The white rose petals beneath, her heels, the whispers of awe from the guests, the soft hum of the string quartet. All of it had been carefully crafted to celebrate a love she thought was unwavering. Her dress fit like a second skin, the veil light as breath. She glanced around the room and saw familiar faces, her mother beaming with pride, her best friend dabbing tears from her eyes, and even her reserved father trying to suppress a rare smile. But one face was missing, Ethan's, the groom, the man who had written her love letters every Sunday, who had proposed in the rain under a cracked umbrella, who had once promised, "I'll never leave your side." The officiant checked his watch. The music looped once, then twice. The murmurs began. Julia's smile faltered. Her chest tightened. Still, she waited. It wasn't like Ethan to be late. It wasn't like him to be anything less than devoted. 5 minutes turned into 20. Her fingers clenched the bouquet until the stems bent. Finally, a whisper rushed down the aisle like a gust of cold wind. "He's not coming." Her mother stood. Her friend tried to reach her, but Julia couldn't hear them. The world narrowed into a tunnel of white noise, her breath shallow, her vision blurred. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, alone, dressed for forever, left with nothing but questions echoing louder than the church. Bells that never rang. The silence wasn't just humiliating, it was paralyzing. And as the guests slowly filtered out, unsure whether to offer comfort or space, Julia remained rooted to the altar, still hoping for a door to open, for someone to say it was a mistake, a prank, a misunderstanding. But no one came. No explanation, no letter, no apology, just absence. And in that absence, something inside her cracked, not loudly but deeply. Because being left without a reason isn't just painful, it's erasure. And Julia would carry that silence into the next day, where everything would change. The morning after should have been filled with bitter questions, but Julia woke up to something worse. Numbness. Her wedding dress, still crumpled on the bedroom floor, looked more like the aftermath of a performance than a promise. She sat in her robe by the window, eyes dry, body heavy, staring at nothing and everything. The phone hadn't rung. No texts, no emails. Ethan had vanished without a trace. Not a word to her, not a message to her parents, not even a call to the wedding planner. People around her tried to rationalize it. "Maybe he panicked," her mother whispered. "There has to be an explanation," her best friend insisted. But Julia didn't respond. She wasn't looking for explanations anymore. She was looking for breath, for the strength to stand up without collapsing under the weight of rejection. The news had already spread. Social media was flooded with half-truths, pity and speculation. Photos from the ceremony, her waiting at the altar, guests, looking confused, the empty aisle, were being shared with captions like "runaway groom" and "the wedding that never happened." She didn't read the comments. She didn't need the world's confusion to confirm her own. What haunted her wasn't just that he left. It was how completely he disappeared. Julia had spent 2 years building a future with this man. She knew his coffee order, his sleep habits, his favorite childhood memory. And now, he was a ghost. That morning, a knock came at the door. For a moment her heart raced, foolishly hoping it might be him. But it was a courier. A simple man in a blue jacket, holding a plain brown envelope with her name written on it, in Ethan's handwriting. No return address, no postage, just her name. She opened it slowly, hands trembling not from fear, but from something deeper. Anticipation wrapped in dread. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a photo. She recognized the handwriting immediately. "I'm sorry I couldn't face you. "But if you see this photo, you'll understand." Her breath caught in her throat as she unfolded the image. It wasn't a place. It wasn't a note. It was a person. And the face staring back at her didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to someone she knew, someone close. Julia stared at the photo, her heartbeat stumbling over itself. The image wasn't blurry or ambiguous. It was clear, recent, deliberate. Ethan stood beside another person, their hands intertwined, their faces close, as if caught in the middle of a laugh or a kiss. But what hollowed her chest wasn't the intimacy. It was the identity of the woman beside him. Her name was Rachel, Julia's cousin, her childhood best friend, the person who had helped her pick out the dress, who had held her hand through bridal nerves, who had toasted her during the rehearsal dinner with words like eternal love and meant to be. Julia blinked hard, hoping the image would change, that maybe it was just a trick of the light, a mistake, someone who merely resembled her. But there was no doubt. It was Rachel. And the look in Ethan's eyes, that softness, that safety, was not the look of someone who had slipped. It was the look of someone who had chosen. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She clutched the letter again, reading the brief words over and over as if more meaning would rise from the ink. "I couldn't face you." He had made this decision knowing exactly what it would cost her. And still, he didn't show up. Not to confess, not to explain, not even to apologize in person. He let her stand in front of friends, family, and God, waiting, while he held hands with someone she had trusted since they were 10. And yet, something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the message. You'll understand. Understand what? That he loved someone else? That he didn't love her enough? That he was too weak to confront the truth? The envelope contained no further detail, but the photograph had been taken somewhere familiar, a bench near the botanical garden. Julia had suggested it once as a wedding photo location, which meant this wasn't a spontaneous escape. It had been planned. Days, weeks, months? Her head throbbed. Her heart pulsed in confusion, anger, grief. And beneath it all, a quiet, insistent thought whispered through the noise. This wasn't just about love. There was something else beneath the surface. A secret. A reason. And whatever it was, she needed to find it. Because suddenly, being left at the altar felt less like rejection, and more like warning. The following day, Julia woke with her mind already racing. Sleep had offered no peace. Only fragmented dreams, blurry images of Ethan's face fading into Rachel's, surrounded by murmurs she couldn't decipher. The photograph lay on her desk like a wound that refused to close. But she couldn't look away. Something in Ethan's expression haunted her. Not guilt, not triumph. Fear. And Rachel? She didn't look like someone who had won anything. There was tension in her shoulders, a stiffness in her smile. Julia had studied people long enough to recognize forced joy. That morning, she drove across the city with no destination in mind. She passed their old coffee shop, the park where Ethan had once told her she was the only person who made him feel safe, and finally the flower shop where Rachel worked part-time. She parked across the street, hands gripping the steering wheel, so tightly her knuckles paled. The storefront looked ordinary, sunflowers in the window, a closed sign hanging crookedly. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. She waited, not sure for what. Answers? Confrontation? Closure? Then a figure emerged from the alley beside the shop. Not Rachel. A man. Older. Clean-cut. He looked vaguely familiar. As Julia leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, he knocked on the back door and handed Rachel a small brown envelope. She opened it, scanned whatever was inside, and then, startled, looked over her shoulder. Her face was pale. She shoved the envelope into her apron and shut the door quickly. Julia's breath caught. That wasn't the behavior of someone living a romantic fantasy. That was someone being watched or threatened. The pieces refused to fit. Why would Ethan abandon everything for Rachel if she seemed so afraid? Unless it hadn't been a choice. Unless the photo was never meant to hurt Julia, but to tell her something, to warn her. The memory of Ethan's note resurfaced. If you see this, you'll understand. But Julia didn't understand. Not yet. And that uncertainty burned, deeper than the heartbreak. She pulled out her phone and searched for the man she'd just seen. It took only minutes. He had a public business profile. His name was Anthony Silvera, private investigator. Julia's heart sank. Why would Rachel be meeting a PI behind a flower shop the day after Ethan disappeared? Unless this wasn't about love or betrayal at all. It was about something hidden, and Julia had just stepped into it. Julia couldn't sit with the questions any longer. That same afternoon, she called the number listed on Anthony Silvera's website, pretending to be a potential client. Her voice wavered only slightly as she asked for a same-day consultation. To her surprise, the receptionist replied that Anthony had just had a cancellation and could meet in an hour. She didn't allow herself time to reconsider. 30 minutes later, she walked into a modest office on the edge of downtown. No nameplate, no polished furniture, just a plain glass door, a ticking wall clock, and the faint smell of burnt coffee. Anthony met her with a nod. He was cordial, not overly warm, the kind of man who measured words before using them. "How can I help you?" he asked. Julia sat across from him, unsure of how to begin. So she didn't lie. "I saw you today, with Rachel, my cousin." He didn't react. No denial, no surprise, just a slight pause. "I was hoping you'd come," he said calmly. That sentence dropped into her chest like ice. "Then why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice sharper now. "Because you weren't ready. And I wasn't sure how much Ethan told you, if anything." Julia's breath caught. "You know where he is?" Anthony looked at her, serious now. "I know why he ran. And I know it wasn't because he didn't love you." Her stomach flipped. She wanted to believe it, but everything she'd experienced screamed otherwise. "Then tell me," she said. "Tell me why he left me at the altar. Why he ran to my cousin." Anthony leaned forward, lacing his fingers on the desk. "Because Rachel is in danger, and so are you." The words didn't register at first. They sounded like fiction, absurd, theatrical. "What are you talking about?" she asked, blinking hard. "Someone's been following Rachel for months," he continued, "harassing her, breaking into her apartment. She kept it quiet because she didn't want to scare your family. Ethan found out and hired me, but when he got too close, the threats shifted. To you." Julia froze. Her mind tried to connect dots that hadn't even existed a day before. "So he left to protect me?" Anthony nodded once. "He didn't just leave. He disappeared because someone wanted him gone. And now you're the only one asking the right questions." Julia's thoughts raced in every direction, each one colliding with the next. Danger? Threats? It sounded like a conspiracy. And yet, the weight in Anthony's voice made it impossible to dismiss. She looked down at her, hands which had started to shake, then back at him. "Who would do this? Why Rachel? Why me?" Anthony hesitated, then opened a locked drawer and pulled out a file folder. "This stays between us," he said, sliding it toward her. Inside were printed photos, time-stamped surveillance stills, and written reports. Julia's eyes widened as she flipped through them. Rachel, looking over her shoulder while leaving work. Ethan, meeting with a man whose face had been blurred for privacy. And in the corner of one frame, Julia herself, coming out of a cafe weeks earlier, unaware of the figure standing half a block behind her, partially obscured but clearly watching. "These weren't just coincidences," Anthony said quietly. "Someone has been tracking all three of you. Rachel's phone was cloned, Ethan's email was hacked, and we believe your social media was being monitored. Julia's breath caught again. But why? Anthony exhaled slowly, leaning back. Rachel was involved with someone years ago, a man named Luis Cortez. She ended it. He didn't. He disappeared for a while, but 2 months ago, we started seeing signs he was back. Online activity, digital footprints. He was obsessed, unstable, and smart. Julia felt like she was sinking. You think he's behind all of this? I know he is, Anthony said. We believe he was planning something for the wedding. Ethan got wind of it. Too late to call the police with proof, but early enough to make a choice. He could go through with the wedding and put you in front of hundreds of people. Or he could vanish, quietly. Confuse everyone. Delay whatever was coming. The room seemed to darken around her. The humiliation, the silence, the unanswered questions, they hadn't been punishment. They had been protection. Why didn't he tell me? She whispered. Because if you knew, Anthony said, you would have tried to stop him. You would have shown up, and that would have made you a target. Julia closed the file slowly. Her heart hurt in a new way now, not from betrayal, but from the weight of a love that had sacrificed everything to keep her alive. Julia left Anthony's office with the file pressed tightly against her chest, as if holding it close would help keep the chaos inside from spilling out. The city outside buzzed with normalcy. Cars honking, people rushing past, laughter from a cafe patio nearby. It felt dissonant. How could the world go on when hers had just been rewritten for a second time? She wandered the streets for nearly an hour, replaying every moment of the last few weeks through a new lens. Ethan's sudden distance days before the wedding, Rachel's pale expressions at the dress fitting, the nervous glances exchanged between them when they thought she wasn't looking. What she'd assumed were signs of betrayal now looked like the edges of fear. Pain twisted in her chest, deeper than heartbreak, because this wasn't just a story of love lost. It was one of love protected and love silenced, and she had misread it all. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone, staring at Ethan's number. The screen blinked, still saved as My Forever. She hadn't changed it. Couldn't. Not yet. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she stopped. Anthony's words echoed in her mind. He disappeared to protect you. If she called him, would she be putting him at risk? Or worse, bringing whoever was behind this closer? She opened the messages instead, hesitating before typing just 2 words. I know. Then deleted them. She couldn't reach out. Not yet. Not until she understood the full scope of what was happening. And if someone was watching her, she couldn't risk exposing Ethan's location. But she also couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't sit idle and let the people she loved live under threat, while she carried on with wedding refunds and empty condolences. Julia turned a corner and walked into the nearest bookstore. She didn't need another romantic novel or wedding magazine. She needed strategy. She bought a blank notebook and a ballpoint pen. If she couldn't call Ethan, she would do the next best thing. She would follow the threads he left behind. Piece by piece. She would find Rachel. She would find Luis Cortez. She would find the truth. Because she hadn't been left behind. She had been given time, and she refused to waste it. That night, Julia sat in her apartment surrounded by pages, notes from the file Anthony had shared, articles she had pulled from obscure websites, and a growing list of questions she was no longer afraid to ask. The notebook sat open in her lap, the first page titled simply, What They Didn't Say. Each name had its own column. Ethan, Rachel, Luis Cortez. And beneath each, she listed what she knew, what she guessed, and what she needed to find out. Her handwriting was calm, but her pulse wasn't. Still, it was the first time in days she felt like she was doing something other than surviving. She wasn't a passive character in someone else's mystery anymore. She was writing her own map. One entry kept tugging at her attention: the bench from the photograph. The location seemed too specific, too symbolic. She hadn't been there in months, but she remembered the spot well. It was the kind of place someone would choose to be seen, or remembered. She made a decision. At dawn, before the city stirred, she'd go there. If Ethan had left a message, if there was anything he'd wanted her to notice, it would be there. But another idea came with the thought. What if someone else was watching that place too? What if the photo had been sent not just to warn her, but to lure her? She hesitated, staring at her reflection in the dark window across from the couch. Her eyes looked older now, not broken, but sharpened. Wiser in a way she hadn't wanted to become. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about danger. And she was beginning to understand how close it had come. How easily the story could have ended not with a missing groom, but with a tragedy. A knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. Her heart stopped. She hadn't told anyone where she was. She crossed the room in silence, peering through the peephole. No one. Just an envelope lying on the floor. No markings. No handwriting. Just wait. She picked it up carefully and opened it. Inside was a photo. Another one. This time it was her. Taken that morning, drinking coffee alone. The message on the back read, "You're not as invisible as you think." Julia's fingers trembled as she held the photo, the weight of it heavier than the paper it was printed on. Someone had been close enough to capture her without her noticing, framing her in a moment that, until now, felt private. Her shoulders tensed. The room that had once offered safety now felt like a stage, every window a potential threat, every silence a trap. She dropped the envelope and paced in small circles, her thoughts unraveling faster than she could hold them. Was Luis Cortez watching her? Was Rachel safe? Did Ethan know this had escalated so far? The message, "You're not as invisible as you think," wasn't just a warning. It was a game, a move in something much larger than heartbreak. Whoever was behind this didn't just want her afraid. They wanted her aware, and that terrified her more than if they had stayed hidden. Julia closed all the blinds, checked the locks, and then sat in the dark with her back against the wall trying to breathe. Panic pushed at the edges of her chest, but she didn't let it in. Not now. She couldn't afford to be consumed. She picked up her phone to call Anthony but stopped. She didn't want to drag him further into this. She had already done too much by confronting him without warning. Instead, she opened her notebook again and flipped to a blank page. At the top she wrote, "He wants me to run." Then below it, "So I won't." She stared at the words until they stopped shaking on the page. Then she stood, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and forced herself to think like Ethan might have. Not emotionally, but strategically. He had seen this coming and made his move. Now it was her turn. She scanned the room and began mentally mapping out the weak points, where someone might watch, how someone might listen. There were no microphones, no hidden cameras. At least, not yet. But the threat wasn't about tech. It was psychological. He wanted her to feel exposed. But if she could stay calm inside that exposure, she would not only survive it, she could outsmart it. The fear was real, but so was her resolve. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was planning her next step. The next morning, Julia returned to the place in the photograph, the old wooden bench near the botanical garden, where Ethan and Rachel had once sat in secret. But this time, she came with intention. She wore a gray hoodie, sunglasses, no makeup, blending in, not to hide, but to observe. She arrived early, just after sunrise, when the air was cool and the paths still empty. Her heart beat in her ears as she sat down, pretending to scroll through her phone while her eyes scanned the area through peripheral glances. She stayed like that for nearly an hour. Nothing. No footsteps. No watchers. Just birds and wind and the occasional jogger. But something felt off. This place wasn't random. If the photo had been staged here and sent with that message, someone had wanted her to return. So she looked closer, beneath the bench, along the sides, inside the small gap between the backrest slats. And there, tucked beneath a strip of wood, held in place with clear tape, was a USB drive. Her pulse quickened. She slipped it into her coat pocket and stood, walking away slowly, not looking back. Once home, she locked the door and closed all the blinds again. Then, with shaking hands, she opened her laptop and plugged the drive in. One folder. No name. Inside, 6 video files. She clicked the first. It was grainy security footage, taken from what looked like a hallway camera. Rachel walked quickly past, glancing over her shoulder. The timestamp was from 2 weeks before the wedding. The second video showed Ethan, arguing with someone out of frame in a parking lot. His voice was distorted, but his anger was clear. The third video chilled her. It was a view of her, outside her apartment building. At night, someone had been following all of them, collecting footage like pieces of a puzzle only they understood. She clicked the last video. Ethan appeared, sitting in what looked like a hotel room. His face was tired, eyes dark. He spoke directly into the camera. "If you found this, it means I couldn't tell you in person. I never wanted to leave you, but I had to. Rachel's life, your life, both were at risk. And the man behind this, he's closer than you think." Then the screen went black. Julia sat frozen. The words, "He's closer than you think," ringing in her ears like a low, constant alarm. She rewound the video 3 times, searching Ethan's face for clues. Was he being watched as he recorded it? Was he hiding something more in the tone of his voice? But the message was clear enough. The danger wasn't distant, it was near, and someone she already knew was behind it. Her mind raced through names, faces, conversations. Who had access to her, to Rachel, to Ethan? Who would benefit from tearing them apart or driving them into hiding? She thought of wedding, guests, co-workers, even family members. The realization that anyone could be the threat made her skin crawl. But one detail in the video caught her attention. Just behind Ethan, partially reflected in a mirror, was a blurry painting. It wasn't a hotel chain artwork. It was specific, familiar. Julia zoomed in and her breath hitched. It was the blue abstract piece that used to hang in the study of her uncle's house. Rachel's father, a home she had visited countless times, a place that had always felt safe. She tried to dismiss it. Maybe Ethan had just been meeting there. Maybe it was a coincidence. But as she scrolled back through Anthony's photos, one stuck out. A man, partially obscured in a frame, handing an envelope to someone. Not Ethan, not Rachel, but now, unmistakably, her uncle. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't seen him at the wedding. He had claimed to be out of town, dealing with a business emergency. But now she remembered Rachel avoiding his name every time Julia asked where he was. Her uncle was respected, wealthy, private. He had connections, influence, and motive? That was still a shadow. But something was there. Julia's hands clenched into fists. If he was the one behind the threats, behind Rachel's fear and Ethan's disappearance, if he was the man Cortez used to hide behind, then this wasn't just about obsession. It was about control. Secrets buried in a family too proud to admit. Something was rotten. Julia stood, trembling but resolute. It was time to visit someone she never thought she'd have to question. Because when betrayal comes from outside, it's a wound. But when it comes from blood, it's a fracture that echoes through generations. Julia didn't call ahead. She knew that if she gave him time to prepare, she'd never get the truth. She drove straight to her uncle's estate, a large house just outside the city, surrounded by iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges, an image of order masking something far less clean. The housekeeper let her in without question. "He's in the study," she said, gesturing with a faint nervousness Julia didn't remember seeing before. Julia walked the long hallway slowly, each step tightening the knot in her stomach. The door was ajar. She pushed it gently, and there he was, her uncle, seated behind his mahogany desk, flipping through paperwork as if the world outside hadn't shifted. He looked up, unsurprised. "Julia," he said with that practiced warmth, "didn't expect you today." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need the truth." He didn't move. "Of course." She reached into her bag and placed the printed photo from Anthony's file on the desk, the one where he was handing the envelope to Rachel. For the first time, a flicker passed over his expression. Gone in a second, but not unnoticed. "I've been looking into what happened to Ethan," she said. "And Rachel. I know someone was following them. I know Ethan disappeared to protect us. And I know this," she tapped the photo, "wasn't business." Her uncle leaned back slowly, fingers steepled. "Julia, you're letting fear cloud your judgment." "Am I?" she asked. "Then why did I find Ethan's video recorded? In your house?" He didn't answer, just stared. Not angry, not panicked, just cold. "You're smarter than I thought," he said finally. It wasn't a compliment, it was a calculation. "Then tell me the truth," she pushed. "Why them? Why now?" He stood, walked to the bar and poured himself a drink. "Some things are bigger than emotion, Julia. Bigger than love stories. Sometimes we do what we must to protect what we've built." "What you built?" she asked, disbelief creeping in. "What does Ethan have to do with any of this?" He took a slow sip. He saw too much. "Of what?" "Of me." Silence fell like a hammer. And in that silence, Julia understood. This wasn't about obsession. It was about legacy, image, power. And Ethan had threatened all three. Julia left the house without another word. Her uncle hadn't stopped her. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't begged her to keep it quiet. And that silence said more than anything he could have confessed. The drive back was a blur, streetlights, blending into streams of gold, her grip tight on the steering wheel as if letting go would mean unraveling. She didn't cry. Not this time. Whatever innocence she had clung to about her family, about the meaning of loyalty, about the safe places in her life, that illusion had been shattered. She understood now that Ethan hadn't abandoned her. He had protected her, and by doing so he had placed himself in exile, carrying a burden he never asked for. The betrayal had never been his. It had been orchestrated by someone who shared her blood but not her conscience. She got home and opened her laptop again. The videos were still there. Proof. A map of everything she had been forced to see, forced to survive. She hovered her finger over the send button. One email, and every reporter in the city would have it. Names, faces, motives, a full unraveling. But she paused. Not out of doubt, but because revenge wasn't her language. Not anymore. She wanted clarity, not destruction. She called Rachel. For the first time in weeks, her voice answered. Shaky, guarded. Julia told her everything. The photos, the USB, the video, her uncle. There was a silence on the line, and then a breath that sounded like it had waited years to be released. "I tried to protect you too," Rachel whispered. "That's why I kept quiet. I thought if he focused on me, you'd stay safe." Julia's chest ached. They had both been protecting each other, and in doing so, had let a monster stay hidden. "We end it," Julia said. "Together." That night, the videos were sent, not to the media, but to a lawyer Rachel trusted. Quietly, legally, strategically. And within 48 hours, The walls of that perfect family estate began to crack. Julia didn't celebrate. She just sat on that same park bench, watching the morning unfold. No camera in sight. No envelope at her feet. Just sunlight. And silence. And the knowledge that Ethan had never truly left her. He had just led her to the truth. In the days that followed, Julia felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not the celebratory kind that erupts with joy, but a quiet, aching release. Like finally exhaling after holding your breath for too long. The truth was out. No more guessing. No more wondering if she had overreacted, misunderstood, or imagined the whole thing. Her uncle was now under investigation for financial crimes, manipulation, and interference with witness protection cases. The connections ran deeper than she ever could have guessed. Politicians, business partners, even officers who had turned a blind eye in exchange for silence and security. It was a web Ethan had discovered too late, and Julia had been caught in its threads. But now the threads were breaking. Rachel moved into a friend's home in another city, far from the estate, and Julia helped her pack. There were tears, yes, but also laughter. Fragile, necessary. The kind of laughter people share not because things are funny, but because they survived what wasn't. On the last night before Rachel left, they stood on Julia's balcony, 2 mugs of tea warming their hands, watching the lights of the city blink in the distance. "Do you think he's okay?" Rachel asked. "Ethan?" Julia nodded slowly. "I don't know where he is, but I know he'd be proud of us." Rachel looked down, then smiled. "He would have liked this moment. Us here, stronger." Julia didn't say anything. She just reached out and held her friend's hand. There were no guarantees, no promises that life wouldn't wound them again. But now, they were awake, clear, and unafraid. Later that week, Julia returned to the church where she'd once been left waiting. This time there were no guests, no dress, no music, just her. She sat in the last pew and stared at the altar, no longer a symbol of abandonment, but of rebirth. Not all beginnings are wrapped in joy. Some are carved out of pain, and hers, though cracked, was hers alone now. She opened her notebook, the same one she had written in on that terrifying night, and on a fresh page she wrote, "He left me because he loved me, and I stayed because I learned to love myself." Then she closed it and walked into the light. Months passed. The scandal surrounding Julia's family faded from the headlines, swallowed by newer tragedies, fresh distractions. But some wounds don't need front-page ink to matter. They heal quietly, beneath the surface, through ordinary days and the soft return of peace. Julia moved to a new apartment near the sea. Not far from the city, but far enough to feel like a new chapter. She began painting again, not for galleries or for approval, but for herself. Her brushstrokes were no longer tentative. They were wide, vibrant, defiant. She filled canvas after canvas with ocean skies, storms, and sunlight breaking through. Her therapist once told her that art is how the soul confesses what the mouth cannot say. And now, each painting became its own confession. Sometimes Rachel would visit on weekends, and they'd walk the shore barefoot, no longer needing to talk about the past because it no longer owned them. And sometimes, when the sun dipped just right, Julia would feel Ethan near. Not as a ghost, not as a wound, but as a force that had shaped her. She hadn't heard from him since the videos. No messages, no sign, just absence. But it didn't ache anymore. It reminded her of something vital. That love, when real, doesn't always stay, but it always leaves something behind. Courage, memory, change. One evening, as Julia stood on her porch watching the waves crash gently in the distance, the mail arrived. Among the bills and catalogs, there was one envelope. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. It was the bench, Their bench. And on it, a small inscription carved into the wood that hadn't been there before. Just 2 words. "Still here." Julia smiled. No tears, no shock, just a quiet understanding. Closure doesn't always come in explanations. Sometimes it comes in presence. She walked to the studio, picked up her brush, and began a new canvas, not to chase the past, but to honor it. She knew the world would wound her again. But now, she had something it could never take. The strength that only truth can offer, and the peace that comes from choosing not revenge, but release. And in that, she was finally free.